Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers. I'm your host, Harriette Cole. So honored to be with you today and to bring you a very timely guest. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, I'm going to say that's nobody who's part of my audience. This is an election year, and there is so much going on, so much for us to think about and really think deeply about. In the space of Dream Leapers, what can wreck a dream? Allowing the wrong person to get into office. Well, we're going to be talking to somebody who's taking a good hard look at what's going on over history as it relates to our political system. Let me tell you about him. He is Clay Cane. He is an award-winning journalist, entertainment editor, political commentator, Sirius XM radio host of The Clay Cane Show, and filmmaker. Cane is the co-editor and contributing writer of the 2012 anthology For Colored Boys Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Still Not Enough, Coming of Age, Coming Out, and Coming Home. He also contributed to Where Did Our Love Go? Love and Relationships in the African American Community. Cane is the author of Live Through This, Surviving the Intersections of Sexuality, God, and Race. He is also a prominent filmmaker. In 2015, Cane created, directed, and produced the BET.com original documentary, Holler If You Hear Me, Black and Gay in the Church. But today, Cane is here for his new book. It is The Grift, the downward spiral of Black Republicans from the Party of Lincoln to the cult of Trump. Please join me in welcoming Clay Cane.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate and value your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And same here. In reading your book, there's so many things, but I'm going to dig into one for starters. You revealed something about yourself that I think is so true for people of every age, but particularly for young people in this era, which is, why should I vote? What does it matter? Why should I register? Is it really going to make a difference?
Yeah.
Even people who are conscious often feel like my one little vote is not going to make a difference. And it took a lot for you to awaken to the power of your vote. Can you share what happened? Because I think a lot of people need to understand process and coming to a point of claiming power.
I love that you're starting here. This is the first time that anybody has ever started here, which leads me to believe that I did some good work with this book.
Absolutely.
This book is not an attack on Black Republicans. It is educating. It is enlightening. And at the end of the book, I have a what's next chapter. And I talk about, as you said, I'm from Philadelphia. When I was very young, I was in Washington State, but I was mainly raised in Philadelphia. I didn't believe in voting. I said voting doesn't matter. Nobody cares. This system is rigged. This system is a fraud. I'm not going to be engaged. I had reasons to believe that because, with all due respect to Philadelphia, I grew up in public schools that did not teach me civics.
Right.
I didn't know how government worked. I couldn't tell you who my senators were, who represented me in the House. I lived blocks away from where the MOVE bombing happened in 1985. For folks that don't know, the city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on a row house, which other houses were impacted, on a Black liberation group called MOVE, and they killed people. This is walking distance from where I lived in West Philadelphia. I was so disengaged. I would go to marches. I would go to rallies. I would protest. as a young man, yet I wasn't showing up to vote. I was calling for change, not knowing who to even ask for change, not knowing that if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
Hmm.
I was 24 years old, young, dumb, thought I was a revolutionary. And then I was living in New York and 9/11 happened. And I will never forget when I saw President Bush. What was he reading? My Pet Goat? He was reading a children's book for 7 minutes as I saw,
After having learned,
after having learned,
after having learned.
there was an attack in New York City. And this was our president. And I heard about the the Bush Gore election and the ballots in Florida, but I wasn't engaged. But that didn't totally get me. It wasn't until I saw Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. I walked out of that theater so outraged. I said, I will never not vote again.
Mhm.
And I've been voting in every election since. And mind you, I've been purged from the voter rolls several times. That's a whole other story.
Wow.
Yeah. So you got to stay on your voter registration. That changed my life. And then I didn't go back to college until later, until I was about 24, 25. The year after 9/11, 2002, I go back to college and I majored in African American studies. So I had this trigger of seeing 9/11, remembering my past in Philadelphia, connecting the dots. Then I began to learn my history. And I began to learn about civic engagement. I began to learn about Frederick Douglass beyond him escaping slavery and writing an autobiography, the kind of work that he did, him calling out Abraham Lincoln. I began to learn that Abraham Lincoln wasn't the great emancipator. Abraham Lincoln wasn't the great liberator. I learned the Emancipation Proclamation did not free Black people. It was a war document. I saw that Black Republicans were the first progressives. They were the first progressives. They pushed the Republican Party to being pro-civil rights, if you want to call it pro-civil rights back then, to being pro-voting rights. I began to learn my history and I got invested. And I read the works of Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and Bishop Henry McNeil Adams. And I absorbed all of this political history, Black political history, and it fundamentally changed my life. And so part of the reason why I wrote this book is that I want to wake people up like I was woken up. You
That's
know,
powerful. It's powerful. You're reminding me of, I often say I've had 39 lives. I've done a lot of things in my career. One of those was to run Ebony magazine. And I had the incredible good fortune to produce a cover with Harry Belafonte and Common. And this was probably in 2007, moving between 2007 and 2008. It was during election time for Obama. And we just thought of them as two stars who had brilliant minds that were also rooted in the community and in empowering the community. And as we did the shoot, and then as the two of them sat down to talk, Harry Belafonte asked Common about voting. And Common admitted that he had never voted before. And I love Belafonte's reaction. He did not chastise him. He did not shame him. And you wrote about this in your book. He educated him and let him understand why it was so important for him not only to vote, but to be a voice. And if you will recall, there was a group of young celebrities, and in America, celebrity counts,
Yeah.
who stood up, did advertisements for Obama, and really started talking about what they felt the impact would be to have this man as their president. To be at that transformational point, I mean, I was the fly on the wall who saw Common's eyes open. And that was so important. And just as you share your story, it's so important. This book, Clay, And I've read just about every word. I got an advanced copy. And when I say this to the audience, you need to know there are a lot of words, there are a lot of facts, there's a lot of information.
There's no
Like
alternative facts.
no alternative facts, but a lot of well-researched facts. And so I've read it, and I'm going to go back and read it again. You know, I had to read literally almost every word to be ready for this interview with you. But you break down an understanding of Black people in the Republican Party from the beginning. So I want to say to you, I'm from Baltimore. My father was a Republican, my mother a Democrat. And my father was born during the Depression. And his name was Harry Cole, like me, Harriette Cole. He was the first Black state senator in Maryland and became the first Black judge on the Maryland Court of Appeals, very actively involved in the system. And he and a lot of his friends chose to be Republican so that there would be people on both sides of the system working on behalf of Black and brown people. And it was a very conscious decision. And you talk about that decision making that some made, even going back to Frederick Douglass. It wasn't like, okay, I'm a Republican, check a box. It was to strategically fight for our rights, our ability to have dignity and peace and freedom. Can you talk about that, over time, what it has meant for Black people to be Republican?
Yeah, so in the 1860s, after the Civil War, there was no room for Black folks to be Democrats whatsoever. So the Republican Party was their home. And I think the saddest part about this, and I lay it out in the book, is that Black people were kicked out of the Republican Party. As Senator Edward Brooks says, a Black Republican from Massachusetts in 1967, he says that the Negro was evicted from the Republican Party. So they were told, you are not welcomed. When Black Republicans tried to speak at the 1964 RNC convention, they were called the N-word and told to get out of here. A famous man, George W. Lee, he was blocked from speaking. This is after years and years of Black folks supporting the Republican Party. So it was strategy. And then they were told, you are unwelcomed. You cannot be here. They made a decision, the Republican Party, to be the white man's party. That's exact language. Dr. King in 1964, he says that I am afraid of the Republican Party becoming the white man's party because it would not only hurt Republicans, it would hurt our entire political system. So that is the book is about the downward spiral of Black Republicans, but also the downward spiral of racial politics in the GOP. And when you have Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, and when you have Richard Nixon putting in this thing called the Southern Strategy, you see they have made a conscious decision that Black folks are not welcomed. But this is also really important too, that the Republican Party, that was our, if this were the 1860s, I'd be Republican. There just would be no other, that would be simple. But even back then, the Republican Party began turning their backs on Black people. You have Abraham Lincoln before he's assassinated. He's putting in a plan called the 10% plan to forgive former Confederates and reinstall them back in the South. And you have Frederick Douglass saying, why are you doing this? You're literally giving the South back to our enslavers. What is wrong with you? You have
What is wrong with you?
What is wrong with you? You have President Ulysses S. Grant, who at the end of his administration makes a decision to pull back federal troops in the South to protect Black folks from white violence. I mean, you're seeing that. Then you have the Compromise of 1877, where the Republican Party makes a decision, we'll leave the Negro problem to the South if we let these former Confederates take over. So it was already in the making, but it took a while to get there. It is a downward spiral. And then by the time you get to the 60s, there was a conscious decision that we do not want you. Lyndon B. Johnson signs that 1964 Civil Rights Act, and it is etched in stone. This is the white man's party. And it's important to note that the grift, a grifter is someone who is a con artist, who is a scammer, but they have strategy with it. They have execution with it. It's beyond just being an opportunist. It's actual strategy. The grift existed long before Trump. And I lay out in the book, there were even people in the 19th century who were voting at black folks, voting against black folks because it gave them proximity to power. But
Mm.
when the Southern strategy gets into place, there was a different rise of the grift. And that watershed moment is Clarence Thomas. We can get into that later.
Yeah,
But yeah,
let's just pause for a moment. So I let
yeah.
folks know we are here. We are gathered here today, here at Dream Leapers, talking to Clay Kane. You know, this is a powerful day. We're talking history, facts. We're talking true facts with Clay Kane. He is the author of The Grift, The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans from the Party of Lincoln to the Cult of Trump. The Cult of Trump. That's powerful. But you just mentioned a dirty word, Clarence Thomas.
Hmm.
I mean, just when in thinking about him and thinking about what it means for someone to get on a federal court, not just the Supreme Court, but in federal courts, because they're there, they don't go anywhere. And what's happening over the years, there's not just Clarence Thomas, there are hundreds of people who have now been put onto these courts to overturn, squash, eradicate the gains that have been made. It's really frightening. It's really, really frightening. What is your understanding of Clarence Thomas?
He is a watershed moment in the grift. The Black Republicans of the 1970s, there was some problematic things there. I mean, there definitely was, but it wasn't a Clarence Thomas. Dr. T.R.M. Howard, Black Republican, he was an abortion doctor. The GOP never talks about him. Arthur Fletcher, he is the architect of affirmative action, a Black Republican. Clarence Thomas says at one point, if it wasn't for affirmative action, I don't know where I'd be in life. But Thomas comes along. Yeah, absolute hypocrite. But Thomas comes along and he does something different than Senator Edward Brooke or Arthur Fletcher or T.R.M. Howard or Floyd McKissick of North Carolina. He realizes, almost hearkening to Booker T. Washington, when Booker T gives that famous 1890 Atlanta Compromise speech and saying that Negroes wanted equality too soon. Know your place. I'm paraphrasing here. Thomas focuses on rugged individualism. And he begins to give these series of what I call, Harriette, auditions. He speaks at a Black alternative conference, and he famously shames his own sister. He characterizes her as a welfare queen. I interview his sister, a brief interview with her in the book, right? And so many things. I mean, the blueprint, the tropes we hear now: independent thinker, Black folks depend on welfare, I see beyond my lens, I don't depend on the government. This idea that Black folks are these lazy, shiftless folks who depend on the government is hilarious, because the government is literally dependent on Black people, but whatever. He gives all the tropes and he is celebrated. They do a big article of him in the Washington Post. Ronald Reagan hears about him. Oh my God, this is the one. He sees beyond his lens. He really gets it. He really understands it. The other Black folks in the GOP before him are basically washed away. They're non-existent. He is elevated to the EEOC. He is elevated with little to no experience, right? When you finally get to the Supreme Court, he is the first, I think he is the only justice in history that did not get a unanimous, well-qualified rating from the American Bar Association. It doesn't matter, because he's the anti-Thurgood Marshall. And the GOP says, we're not going to appoint somebody because they're Black. We're not going to do that, but you should be happy we are appointing somebody who is Black. So they play this weird kind of gaslighting game with us. Rosa Parks warns us of Clarence Thomas. Rosa Parks said, this man is going to take us backwards. Clarence Thomas speaks out against Brown versus Board of Education. This is crazy. But here's the flip side, Harriette. And I say this respectfully. Maya Angelou supported Clarence Thomas.
Ooh.
Derek Bell supported Clarence Thomas.
Ooh.
A lot of folks thought that maybe he's saying this crazy stuff, but when he gets on the court, he won't be that bad. Arthur Fletcher, who I just mentioned, supported Clarence Thomas. almost immediately when he gets in the court. We all know the Anita Hill story, the terrible part of that story. What does he say? It's a high-tech lynching. It is the greatest audition, a high-tech lynching. And he's saying, I'm not being lynched by white people. I'm being lynched by uppity Black people. You see what he did? This grift is, his hustle, his scam is astounding. He is appointed to the Supreme Court and immediately begins attacking civil rights, affirmative action, voting rights. There's a horrific story of a wrongfully convicted Black man named Curtis Flowers in Mississippi. Everyone on the court, I think one other person, they agree he was wrongfully convicted. Clarence Thomas says, my hope is he can be re-prosecuted. I mean, this man is arguably the most powerful Black man in the country, and he has waged war on Black people. And I want to really be clear here. The reason why a lot of Black folks don't support Black Republicans, it's not because they're Republican. It's because it is an obvious grift to get proximity to power, to align yourself with power, that you will do and say anything to get ahead. Because there wasn't this same ire for Michael Steele. Even J.C. Watts, eventually, a congressman from Oklahoma, he begins to support affirmative action. But if you don't toe the line, if you are a Black Republican, you do not toe the line, they will throw you out faster than Liz Cheney. So ever since then, certain Black folks in the GOP, they've been mimicking his blueprint. Some aren't as successful. Some will go on the apology tour like Omarosa. Some will suddenly have that come to Jesus moment and they ask for forgiveness and so on. But even to this day, I mean, allegedly he's getting funding, gallivanting on yachts via money from Harlan Crow. I mean, it's
and even as he and his wife are under fire,
right.
But let's also look at we are in this election cycle, right?
Yeah.
And look at what's happening with Trump. I mean, how many lawsuits? And basically, he's running unopposed this early.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
one thing I will say about him, he is a mastermind at media strategy.
He's a cult leader.
He has played the long game, and it has worked. It is working, and it is frightening.
Yeah.
In part, you know what, Clay? I've been thinking about this. When Trump ran the first time, and then the entire time that he was in office, just about everybody I know was glued to cable television. Whether you were Democrat or Republican, you had your station, you were watching. You would wake up in the morning before you got out of bed, you turned it on to see what in the world is happening now. Oh my God, what is next? And a frightening thing to me is, Biden won, and people who supported him had this huge sigh of relief. Like, okay, the house is not burning anymore. We trust this man. He's not Mr. Flamboyant. He's not any of those things, but we trust that he's going to do his job. And millions of people turned off the television.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at the ratings, what happened to CNN and MSNBC in particular tanked.
Yeah.
Because I think because people trusted nothing horrible is going to happen. I can go back to my life. I can breathe. I trust this man enough to not pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think that now we're like, people are not paying attention right now the way that they need to. And, yes, you're in your book, you talk about what's happening with Republicans, and I want to broaden to what's happening. Like, people are not paying attention. And so with all the research that you've done, all that what do you see and what do you think people need to do now? We're at the beginning of the election process, but it's underway. There've already been, Trump has won twice handily.
Yeah.
What do we do?
So one of the key things is combating misinformation and disinformation. A lot of it is coming from the insurrectionist. A lot of it is coming from, to be frank, some rappers and pop stars. A lot of it is coming from so-called influencers. There is a grift on the left side as well, but the grift for the left, it's much different. The grift on the left is to be contrarian. That
Mm.
can get you a check. That can get you on a big radio show. The grift on the right is to destroy everything and uphold white supremacy. So I think it's combating misinformation and disinformation, and I do my best with the soul of my pen to do that in the grift, to spread the word about it. But there's some key things as well. One thing Democrats do is they will turn a loss. I'm sorry, they will turn a win into a loss. We can get some incredible policy passed, and we'll say, yeah, but not really. That really wasn't important. Oh,
Mm.
yeah, we got a cap on insulin, but we didn't get this. Oh, yeah, that didn't work, but we still have that. We will turn everything into a loss. And if you can't celebrate your wins,
Right.
you don't know when you're winning. So what I try and do is celebrate the wins. I am very critical of Democrats, but it is just truth that this first term of the Biden administration has been pretty damn good.
Yes.
Perfect? No. Perfect? Absolutely not. But it's been pretty good. It's an incredible first term. Pulled us out of COVID, the infrastructure bill, student loan relief, $130 billion. And what's most important to me, Harriette, is Biden has appointed an historic amount of Black judges to a federal bench, more than any other president combined. Judges, the courts, may be our only guardrail for citizenship, not just democracy, but citizenship, as my colleague Reese Colbert says. And the other part, and this might be, I hope I make it accessible in the book. You know, we've had these watershed moments in history. That's why I start at the end of the Civil War, where the country wouldn't have survived. So in 1864, this country wouldn't have survived a Democratic administration, would not have survived it. Frederick Douglass starts a third party. This whole third party talk is so funny to me. It's been going on for forever. By September, before the election, they end the third party because they're afraid the Democratic option might win. Frederick Douglass tried this, and he said, wait a minute now. I don't like Lincoln, but if this Democratic pro-slavery guy wins, it's a wrap for us. In 1964, this country would not have survived a Barry Goldwater Republican administration. It would not have, at least we wouldn't have survived. It'd be a wrap. In 2024, we are at another impasse. Those two examples, the right decision was made. But in 2024, this country, I do not believe will survive a Trump Republican administration. So I try and focus on the urgency of now. And while this book is history, it's also focusing on what's happening right now. And you tried to lead the horse to water. You hope they will drink. I hope for young people, they understand that if this other person gets into office again, he's telling us what they're going to do. They're making it clear. Those are the things: combating misinformation, disinformation, calling on your history, Google searching beyond what you see on a social media meme. And you talk about the cult aspect. In the intro to the book, you know, I interviewed people who survived the Jim Jones cult in 1978. And you know, and this is me, this is them saying it, not me. They literally say the spirit of Jim Jones, who killed majority Black women and children in Guyana in 1978 via this cult called the People's Temple. They said the spirit of Jim Jones is in Trump. They told me that. They said when Trump said, I've done more for Black people than anybody, they were like, that's what Jim Jones told us.
Yes.
Right? So I hope in this election cycle, we get this urgency. I hope that we understand when we're winning. I hope that we get that if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
That's right.
You know, young people have more access than I did when I was young and dumb. So I'm out here. I wrote this book because I care. And some folks might roll their eyes when I say this, but Harriet, I do love this country. I ain't going nowhere. My grand-
And we need to act. Let me
Yeah.
remind folks. This is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are here today talking with Clay Kane, who has written a really powerful book. It is called The Grift: The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans from the Party of Lincoln to the Cult of Trump. You know, Clay, this notion of cult, and as you mentioned, you talked to people who were followers of Jim Jones back during that time. People are following Trump in a cultish kind of way. I mean, the fact that January 6th happened is still something that is beyond understanding, that a lot of people, smart people, it wasn't just a whole bunch of people that got picked up on the road who, were mentally ill or, whatever. It wasn't. When many of those people were interviewed, there were all kinds of folks who are regular citizens who somehow got brainwashed, who somehow came to believe that they should do something against the country. But they were, the true gaslighting, but that it's somehow for the country. That shift in one's mental thinking and shift toward something that's what we call cultish.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of people are afraid that that's where we're headed now. That if that, when somebody has your brain, people talk about this in relationships where in, romantic relationships, like why would this smart person allow someone to beat them up over and over again? Why would this smart person allow whatever the behavior is? And people will say, he had my brain, she had my brain. This is what this seems like. So how do you get your brain back?
Yeah. So here's a distinction that I make. So when I think about people who are in a cult, and when I think about the Jim Jones massacre in 1978, here's a distinction. They were victims. I think we can all agree with that. The people in Trump's cult, they are not victims. They just found their dear leader. They found their supreme leader. And that's a really important distinction. Uh, Trump is the hate that Republicans created. He didn't happen in a vacuum. I don't think they are brainwashed. I think that that is who they are, and they just again found the leader. So my solution, next step, I should say, once you expose the grift, you expose the cult. Some folks may not like this. I say you leave them where they are, and we have to be incentivized. You didn't hear Frederick Douglass saying, "Oh, there are some good Southern Democrats. Oh, they're okay. They're out there." No, we can't look at anecdotal degrees of goodness. We can't make somebody embrace facts. That's going to be impossible to do. So I think that people who are sleepwalking, we got to
Mm.
wake them up. But if you were already in this cult, a card carrying member, and you believe that you are being threatened by, I don't know, Black folks reading proper history or gay folks or whatever the case, I can't help you. So at the end of the book, I make it clear that Michael Steele tells me, former RNC chair, I said, "Is
Mhm.
there any space for Black folks in the Republican Party?" And he said, "No."
This is coming from the man who was in charge of the Republican Party.
Exactly. He says, "No."
Wow.
He says that this party has never atoned for their sins against Black people. So many of these answers, Harriet, to me, come from the original Black Republicans. The original Black Republicans. They didn't believe in this compromise BS. They weren't about that. They said, how can we build public education? How
Mm.
can we build thriving communities where Black folks and poor white folks survive? How can we have citizenship where we can function and have autonomy over our own communities? And I don't want us to give that away. There is always going to be a demon on the other side, but we have to do the work to incentivize ourselves, and or you might incentivize, I might incentivize. How can we activate or trigger someone? But I am long past trying to convert somebody who already found that they're a dear leader, because I believe they were already a part of that cult before Trump came along.
Well, sure. I mean, a lot of people, I think, mistakenly have said, "Oh, it's all his fault." No,
Right.
it's a lot bigger than he is. I mean, and by the way, he used to be a Democrat.
Exactly.
So what is it's just it's frightening. I want to turn the page for a moment because you have done a lot of things. This book is incredible, and there's some other work that you have offered to the country, to the culture, that is equally as brave about you, your life, and what many are going through. And so I just want to talk for a minute. You have addressed what it means to come out as an African American man. You were part of this particularly interesting project for colored boys who have considered suicide when the rainbow is still not enough, coming of age, coming out, and coming home. What made you decide? That's just one of many that you've worked on that really explore uh, Black sexuality in particular, Black male sexuality. What made you decide to put your voice in the public forum in this way?
When I was growing up, I always thought that gayness equaled whiteness. I didn't even
Mm,
see Black gay people. This may sound silly to some people. It may sound like, what is he talking about? But that really was my experience. I thought gay was a white thing. And I was told that gay
interesting.
was a white thing. I remember when I first came to Harlem many, many years ago in the late 90s, I was walking down the street and I saw a shirt in a window that said, it was a black shirt with white letters, and it said, a real Black man doesn't deal drugs. A real Black man takes care of his kids. A real Black man does not sleep with other men.
Oh,
I saw that. You wouldn't see that today, thank God. So in my work, I have always wanted
wow.
to connect those intersections. I've always wanted to make sure that somebody doesn't feel as alone as I felt. I've also done a lot of work around what I call spiritual and theological violence
Mhm,
in the Black church. And in that, for the essay I wrote in For Colored Boys, it was about church hurt. I did a
mhm.
doc for BET, Holler If You Hear Me, Black and Gay in the Church. You know, Black Black LGBT folks, we have been faithfully serving the Black community since there was a Black community. And we as Black folks, we can't throw anybody away. We should not be throwing away James Baldwin or Marsha P.
Mhm.
Johnson or Alan Locke or Langston Hughes or Bessie Smith or the nameless, faceless Black LGBT folks who have been right by our side, like Bayard Rustin, fighting for
Yeah.
our right to exist. I want all Black folks to be happy. I want us to all be free. So I did that work to try to contribute to a bit of freedom, a bit of liberation. And I hope that it makes somebody see differently and makes somebody just move with humanity. I want us to move with humanity. I don't want us to hurt each other. So that's the reason why I've done that kind of work. And it's meant a lot to me. And I'm now 46 years old, going on 47 years old. And to hear people bring up stuff that I did 10 years ago, when to be
Mhm.
honest with you, people are acknowledging the work that I did many, many years ago. But I can recall other people that I collaborated with. It kind of felt like nobody cared back then. There was no social media,
Right.
there was no hashtags. You did the work, you put it out there, and you hope that it resonated. So I'm really proud of that work that I did early in my career. And no matter how big or small your platform is, if you have a platform, you just want to use it.
Mhm.
Want to
No,
use it.
that powerful, and as it's interesting. I never thought about that, about, people maybe thinking that gay meant white.
Oh yeah.
But when you mention it, I could imagine that there are people who would have that thought. When you mentioned Bayard Rustin, I was so proud to see the film being made to really share this man's story and to let us have a window into during that time in history when we were maligned just simply for being Black walking down the street. And this brilliant man who was brave enough to live his life uh, was also fierce in working to protect our people, and creative and brilliant. Were you aware of Bayard Rustin when you were growing up?
I learned about Bayard Rustin when I was in college. Um, Again, going to Rutgers University, Newark. I wanted to go to HBCU, but I couldn't afford it, sadly. Changed my life, and learning about Bayard Rustin. I had some great teachers there that weren't afraid to tell the truth. And, the truth liberates you.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
saw myself in these Black studies courses. I didn't know about the Harlem Renaissance like that. I think I'd heard about it, but I didn't know about Zora Neale Hurston, and I didn't know about all these great Wallace Thurman, all these great people. So I didn't know of him until college, and I had the pleasure of meeting Bayard Rustin's partner many, many years ago at NYU.
Wow.
Uh, so I feel like I take all those people with me as
Mhm.
I tell my truth, write these stories. Um, I wonder what they would think of our political climate. I often talk to the elders in my family, and I ask them, you were asking earlier about just the future and having some concerns. And the
Yes.
elders in my family, and I mean elders, I'm talking about, upper, late 70s, early 80s. And they say they're not afraid.
Mm.
They say that I've seen more than you. And one of the things that one of my aunts told me, and this is really powerful, was that yeah, things are shaky right now, but it's a different electorate now. 1964, we were there, but it was tough. 1864, Lord, but we have more options now, and she feels better with the options that we have. You know, we don't have to go down the road that others want us to go down. You know, there's a quote by Ida B. Wells that I use in the book. Ida B. Wells, amazing, iconic journalist and
Yeah.
advocate against lynchings. She said, "The way to right past wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them." And I see this book, The Grift, as shining my light of truth. And I hope
I
once you
I
see
I
the
agree
light,
with you.
yeah,
I wanna say, Clay, I agree. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, it is chock full of facts. And so it's a history lesson, but for anybody who doesn't like reading history books, it doesn't read like a history book.
oh
It
yeah,
just reads like it's a really engaging read with a lot of information in it. There are names that you will know, and then there are a bunch of names you don't know. Wow, these people served in these roles. This is what this actually meant. You give a lot of context to things so that people can have framework, and I agree with you. We live in the age of social media and influencers and all of that, and people will look something up. On the one hand, it's great you can look things up on the internet and learn things, but you need to do a little research. The first thing you see may not be true.
that's right.
It just
That's
may
right.
be that a lot of people looked at it. So it
Yes,
rises to the top, or somebody paid for it to rise to the top. You still have to do your research. And what, yes, there are a lot of choices, as you say, the elders in your family have acknowledged. I worry sometimes because there's so many choices and there's so much information that people have become a little lazy and they're not really examining what impact could these choices have on my life and my community? Is this true? Whatever, fake news was what that became a term during
yeah,
the Trump administration in what they thought was a positive way.
yeah,
So, having a book like yours helps as a reference of fact. And I hope that people will look at it in that way because it is important for us to take the time to examine the facts so that we're not just regurgitating something that somebody else said. We have a few minutes left, but let me remind folks this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are honored today to be talking with Clay Kane. He has written a book, The Grift: The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans from the party of Lincoln to the cult of Trump. And I want to say that if you are someone who pays attention to what's happening in our politics and our history, this is a book that you will appreciate because it starts in the 1800s and goes right up until right this minute. And to have that context, I think is very helpful, especially in an election year when we have the ability to make a decision, to use our power, and to be informed about that is so incredibly important. And Clay, this is the election year for the president, but will you speak for a moment, because you talk about this in your book, about the midterm elections, the elections for all these local roles, and the importance of learning who those candidates are and what they stand for and how that impacts the average person's life?
Thank you for that question. This is why I say that many of the answers are in the original Black Republicans. So in 1868, there was 80% of Black folks, not Black women, sadly, Black women couldn't vote, of Black men registered to vote. 1868. Can you imagine that?
80%.
80%?
Like, we
That's
wanna
crazy.
wave a flag.
You can't even envision that today. And I know we have voter suppression. I know we have horrible voter suppression laws, but they had the kind of voter suppression you can never even imagine. I mean,
Right.
Black men being killed at the voting booth.
Yes.
Nonetheless, they were able to elect Black folks all throughout the South. I'm talking about sheriff. I'm talking about lieutenant governor. A lot of people don't know Alexander Kelso. He was the lieutenant governor of Mississippi. All right, they were able
Mississippi.
Mississippi, in South Carolina, Treasury, everything you could think of, right? And I kind of argue, first of all, you have Lincoln setting in motion forgiving former Confederates, but I argue that that kind of electoral power really scared Republicans and Democrats in the South, Republicans as well. So let us go back to that. Can you imagine? I mean, if we had 80% voter turnout or registered to vote today, we should have a Black senator in Mississippi.
The power.
Yes. Like, here's the thing that I say. This really goes to the heart of the book. We had less power then and used our power more. We have more power now and use our power less. And that's what I want us to get our mind around. I hear people say, well, I vote all the time and nothing happens. Are you really voting all the time? Are you sure? Are we really voting all the time? I mean, when the other team loses, they keep on going. They didn't get Roe v. Wade overturned. They pass that on to their grandkids, their great grandkids. When they don't get what they want, they keep on voting. If you don't like who's in office, then guess what? You vote them out. Who's your state house rep? Who's your house rep? I hear folks say, oh, well, Biden's old. And I say, well, did you vote during the primaries? Did you support Julian Castro? He didn't even make it to the primary. Did you support Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg? We had some young folks running.
We did.
If you don't like voting is one tool in the toolbox, and I want us to use that tool in the toolbox. So it goes to local elections are everything. When we didn't have the president or the vice president during Reconstruction, we had local elections.
That's
local.
true.
So it goes back to our roots. We talk about our ancestors and all that stuff. Let's really call on them. Let's just look back to what they did. And I believe we could win. And I believe us being a multicultural country is the best of us. I truly believe that. It is the best of us, not the worst of us. We shouldn't be colorblind. We should be able to see color and accept it. I learn from my friends who are Jewish. I learn from my friends who are Italian. I learn from my friends who are from the South, who are from the North. We should embrace our differences. And the other side doesn't want that. They want Christian nationalism, or they want a Black face who is willing to uphold white supremacy, who will be racial cover for their own prejudices. And that's what makes them a grifter. Not because they're Republican, but they're willing to be an apologist for the worst parts of this country, the parts that that the original Black Republicans will be rolling in their graves. How do we go from Frederick Douglass to Clarence Thomas?
And the good news is we get to vote this year. And I want to recommend to everyone read Clay's book. It is informative. Some of it is going to break your heart, but in the end, it will motivate you to get out there and take action. Clay, congratulations. Thank you for talking with us today. Thank you for doing the work.
Thank
You
you.
have done so much work, so much research, and you poured your heart and soul and research into this book, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. I appreciate all the love and support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Dream Leapers. Remember, get your copy of The Grift, The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans, from the Party of Lincoln to the Cult of Trump. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.